Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little topic. I thought that I would review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by the channel known as Blue Blood Sports TV, which I think actually is a very decent channel. I don't necessarily agree with everything that he has to say, but when it comes down to it, and in certain times overall, I do think that he will make certain good points. You can at least tell with Blue Blood Sports TV, even though do I think that he has certain biases here and there? Yes. But when it comes down to it, what I will say is this. I certainly think he knows more of his stuff and more of his information than some of the other channels that I've seen, at least in just terms of talking about the skills and the logic and objectivity overall in boxing, or at least the realism. I think that he has more of a sense of realism than some of the other channels that I've personally seen, but it just is what it is. But anyways, when it comes down to it, we're going to talk about Mr. Jake Paul and overall how big of a star he is in the sport of boxing. And of course, now certain people are even starting to go as far to say that Jake Paul, that not only is he one of the biggest stars in all of the sport, but that he could even be a bigger star than, of course, the main attraction in all of boxing right now, at least when you talk about facing consistent, decent competition, Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. And of course, I've said a multitude of times that Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, he is the main golden goose. He is the main cash cow in all the boxing right now, and I would still stand by it. Now, of course, Jake Paul, he is very, very popular. But of course, you expect that, someone who's going to head into boxing or whatever sport it is, if someone is an A-grade celebrity or if someone is very decently well known for something, and all in all, they just jump into something, a profession, it's going to get highly watched because people overall want to see how good are you really at that? Can this person really do this? And there's certain people all in all that they may be cheering for that person. There may be certain people, probably more people, that overall want that person to be degraded. And it was the same thing with Jake Paul. Jake Paul, actually, in my opinion, he's somewhat taken almost a similar approach to somewhat Floyd Mayweather Jr. has done, not only with Floyd Mayweather Jr. facing Conor McGregor when it came down to an MMA fight, but he's also taking that heel sort of approach, the villain of boxing when it comes down to it. And now people take a look at it, just like with Floyd Mayweather Jr. at that point in time in his career. Floyd Mayweather Jr. was so great that, of course, he ended up being undefeated in his career. And people take a look at it and say, wow, so we just have to see this guy's fights to see if he is eventually just going to get defeated. And it's the same thing that Jake Paul has. He's been matched up somewhat carefully, but at the same time, a lot of people really didn't even think that he was going to go as far to beat Nate Robinson. And now take a look at it. Not only has he knocked out Nate Robinson, he knocked out Ben Askren in one round. He knocked out Tyron Woodley in the rematch, and he completely outboxed Tyron Woodley in the first match, in my opinion. So it's very obvious that, Jake Paul, he's at a very decent place in his career right now. But we're going to be talking about all that in this video. And apparently, from what I hear, his next potential fight could be against Mike Tyson, which I think would sell very, very well. That would be a very, very great fight. Actually, I would personally love to see it. I think that it's a dangerous fight actually for both of them. And certain people may take a look at me and say, oh, you're crazy. Mike Tyson, even at this age, he completely kills Jake Paul. What I'll say is this, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in the video. If Mike Tyson can actually find a way to be in a decent amount of conditioning, because when you hear other athletes talk about boxing, or even other people talk about boxing compared to almost any other sport besides maybe soccer or MMA, it requires the most amount of conditioning, mentally and physically, when it comes down to it, out of any other sport out there. Because you're constantly moving, you're moving in a certain way. You have to put your hands up when it comes down to it. You have to throw, a decent amount of the time. It requires an extra amount of conditioning than almost no other athlete is used to out there. Not even, certain basketball players or soccer players. And they have to overall have their stamina up quite a bit as well because they're constantly moving. I don't even know if those sports require as much stamina and conditioning as what a boxing match does. There's no other sport in the world that is going to require as much conditioning as a fight because you and your opponents are not only constantly trying to outthink each other, but you basically have to constantly avoid certain punches when it comes down to it and constantly move. And on top of that, you're expending energy by trying to attack your opponent and avoid attacks. So it's just very interesting to see how that's going to play out. And my big concern is about Mike Tyson. Now, if Mike Tyson has decent conditioning and if he can go consistently for 8 rounds, Mike Tyson more than likely is probably going to knock out Jake Paul. But that's the big question about Mike Tyson. He's 55 right now, going on 56, and can he actually have the boxing condition at that age to go 8, maybe 10 rounds with Jake Paul, or however long the fight is going to last? I don't know how many rounds, but if I had to guess, 8 rounds. Is Mike Tyson actually going to be able to last that long? We'll see what happens. It should be very particularly interesting. But anyways, Mr. Blue Blood Sports TV is going to talk about it. I'm going to tune in. Let's get into it.
YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So we have some very surprising news as YouTube sensation turned professional boxer Jake Paul, who is now 5 wins, no losses, no draws, 4 wins by way of knockout, 25 years of age, 6'1" with a 76-inch arm reach, coming off of a highlight reel, brutal knockout.
I love how Blue Blood Sports TV, he always lists off their whole entire autobiography. I believe, let me show off a little bit here. I believe when it comes to Mike Tyson, I'm trying to remember, all in all I remember about Mike Tyson, 50 wins in his career, I believe, 6 losses, I believe 44 knockouts. I believe, let's see, I believe he actually has 2 no contests in his career. One was against one fighter, I don't remember the name, and another one was against Andrew Galata, which was originally a TKO win for Mike Tyson, but of course he got caught on marijuana after that fight, and of course it was changed to a no contest.
A victory over UFC legend Tyron Woodley that took place December 18th of 2021. With that said, Jake Paul has surpassed
By the way, Mike Tyson, I believe, was about 5'10", 5'11", with a 72-inch arm reach.
Division world champion, Mexican superstar boxer, who currently is the unified, undisputed super middleweight world champion and was widely considered the face of the sport of boxing and top 3 or number 1, however you so choose fit to put him, at
Blue Blood Sports TV widely was considered to be the face of boxing. Well, you know what? And I understand what Blue Blood Sports TV is saying. Now, do I believe that maybe there is a possible undertone or maybe a possible narrative where he is trying to tear Canelo Alvarez's, his face down? Maybe. But let me say this. I don't know if I can necessarily say that Jake Paul is the face of boxing. Sure, overall, he is a great asset to the sport of boxing, and he does have a professional record. But it basically would be like when CM Punk or Brock Lesnar first joined the UFC, and now the difference is that they were actually facing actual UFC fighters. They were facing fighters that were actually on the roster. So that's a little bit different. But Jake Paul is not even facing legitimate boxers. So in my opinion, it has to be a little bit different, especially when most of these fights, they're pretty much just exhibition fights, but, or I won't say complete exhibition fights because these are taken more seriously, but they're not against fighters, in my opinion, that actually know how to box. So until Jake Paul actually faces a fighter that really knows how to box, in my opinion, I can't really call him the biggest attraction in the sport. What I can say all in all is that he is a big attraction.
He's the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world in Saul Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez is 57 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws, 39 big wins by way of knockout, 31 years of age, 5'8", with a 70-inch arm reach. With that said, on boxing's Forbes list, Jake Paul has surpassed what was being considered the cash cow in the sport of boxing. And Jake Paul is a YouTube sensation. He does essentially, he's a novice, and he does...
Well, to me, Canelo Alvarez is still the cash cow in boxing. And like I said, am I saying this, because I'm a Canelo Alvarez fanboy? No, but like I said, we just have to take a look at this in context. I mean, this would basically be like, if if Trae Young or Luka Doncic, let's say all in all, that they went to golfing and they were competing against each other, in golf, and Luka Doncic was winning actually tournaments, and people say, oh man, well, Luka Doncic, he's one of the biggest attractions in all the golf. Yeah, we can say that, but until you actually prove that you can be somewhat dominant in that sport, I can say that you're one of the biggest attractions out there, but I'm not necessarily going to say that you're the main cash cow of boxing, because to me, that would mean that you have defeated legitimate boxers. And Jake Paul just has not done that. Don't get me wrong, I still give him credit for what the kid has accomplished. But like I said, to just put him over Canelo or some of the other cash cows in boxing, I can say that he's a bigger attraction than some of those guys, just in terms of overall the credibility that he has as a celebrity. But like I said, that's like Michael Jordan overall. When he went to baseball, he was a very, very big story. I don't remember exactly who he played for, but would we say that Michael Jordan is the biggest, he's the main cash cow in all the baseball? I don't know if I would say that.
Exhibition style fights, but they're real professional fights. It's just as a novice, he's fighting guys that you are familiar with instead of fighting your local cab driver, sanitation worker, truck driver, and 9-to-5er. Like most professional boxers that start their career. Jake Paul, he started his career in 22 years of age, and Jake Paul is known to be a YouTube sensation. So with that said, Jake Paul, he gets recognized for his status, but he doesn't get recognized for the fact that Jake Paul is simply a novice in the sport of boxing, just like everybody else that starts off. They fight low level, non.
He's a novice in the sport of boxing, but let me also state this. Every opponent that he has faced is pretty much a novice in the sport of boxing as well. Now, certain people don't know, and they may say, well, Tyron Woodley and Ben Askren, they were trained MMA fighters, so they should know how to, they should know how to box a little bit. Yes, but if you know anything about both sports, MMA fighters, they just strike completely differently. It just is what it is. That's why every time they go into a boxing match, they're never going to win over an elite level boxer. Like, of course, McGregor was pretty much the first one to do it with Floyd Mayweather Jr., at least one that actually counted as a real professional boxing fight from what I remember. At least that was the first mega one. Now I'm hearing that Mr. Kamaru Usman, that he wants to go and face Canelo Alvarez. He has literally no chance against Canelo Alvarez. Canelo not only has way too good of a chin, but he's just way too good when it comes down to, if you have, even Conor McGregor, who I don't even think is that bad of a boxer or a striker in terms of MMA, you can tell that he had some boxing experience. He sparred a C-grade fighter from South Africa and Chris Van Heerden, someone that got their ass kicked and their O taken away, I believe, by Mr. Errol Spence Jr. Chris Van Heerden was able to tee off on Conor McGregor. So these MMA fighters, yes, they can strike a bit, and like I said, because Jake Paul, he's not someone that usually is used to facing that level of competition. Even I still give him credit for what he's been able to do. But like I said, am I going to call you the biggest, thing in all of boxing right now when you haven't faced any legitimate professional boxers? No.
Recognizable competition, okay? You look at the record of Canelo Alvarez when he first started, you don't recognize the guys who he fought. Their record, their resume. Canelo Alvarez has two guys in his first 15 fights that had one fight in their entire career, and that was against him, okay? So Jake Paul, he's just doing it against, entertainers and athletes of other respective sports, okay, of other disciplines. So Jake Paul is doing it against UFC guys like Tyron Woodley and Ben Askren, okay, NBA superstar Nate Robinson, other YouTubers, things like that. But you don't know the guys that Canelo Alvarez fought, or Floyd Mayweather fought, or any of your favorite fighters in the first 15 fights outside of some anomalies like Vasyl Lomachenko, two-time Olympic gold medalist, three-division world champion, former unified lightweight world champion, Ukrainian superstar boxer. Outside of Vasyl Lomachenko, who only has a total of 18 fights currently, and he's 33 years of age because he started late, he had a...
Let me talk about Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko real quick, and let me talk about his Hall of Fame status, in my opinion, because I've talked about Vasyl Lomachenko a multitude of times. Now, depending on whether he's going to be on all-time great status or not, meaning, if he's going to be within my top 50, top 30, top 20, boxers of all time, wherever the hell he's going to rank at the end of his career, in my opinion, he is going to have to defeat some of the very, very talented fighters of his day. Now, he already has defeated some of the very talented fighters of his day, but the main fights that he's going to have to win, Oscar Valdez may be a name that he has to get on there, Leo Santa Cruz, Shakur Stevenson, though, is a big one, Gervonta Tank Davis, maybe Devin Haney, George Kambosos as well, and maybe even a rematch with Teofimo Lopez. Those are the matches that Vasyl Lomachenko is going to have to win, but especially that Gervonta Tank Davis fight. Because Gervonta Tank Davis, that dude is a real, real good fighter. So Vasyl Lomachenko, in my opinion, if he wants to be remembered as an all-time great fighter, he'll probably have to defeat Gervonta Tank Davis. Don't get me wrong, Vasyl Lomachenko deserves respect. He, deserves to be remembered, in my opinion, as a great fighter. But I wouldn't say as of yet as an all-time great fighter. But just in terms of his Hall of Fame status, I don't really know overall what the standards are for boxing Hall of Fame. But they don't seem to be overly high. It depends on what your standard would be. But Vasyl Lomachenko, very clearly, I've seen lesser people than him make it in. So it just is what it is. Paulie Malignaggi, even for example, in my opinion, I think that even he should make the Boxing Hall of Fame. In my opinion, if you're a multiple weight division champion, more than likely you should make the Boxing Hall of Fame. And Paulie Malignaggi, for example, he was a multiple weight division champion. And he didn't win any of those interim bullshit titles like some of these other fighters out here win, like a Mario Barrios, when he got defeated by Gervonta Tank Davis. He actually won the legitimate titles within two weight divisions of one of the official titles in two separate weight divisions. So Paul Malignaggi, in my opinion, and Adrian Broner would even be in the Hall of Fame. Deontay Wilder, in my opinion, would be in the Hall of Fame, and I don't even think that he has a lot of great names on his resume. In my opinion, Vasily Lomachenko, he's greater than any of those fighters, very clearly. It just is what it is. If you think Gedem Origendao, for example, is a Hall of Famer, you have to put Vasily Lomachenko in. No doubt about it. So when I at least say that he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, there's no doubt that he's a first ballot Hall of Famer if you at least know what the hell you're talking about. Now, if it was someone maybe like a David Lemieux, someone who's only won one belt in their career, and you take a look at his record and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of names there, then maybe I would understand. But even David Lemieux, you could argue in the Hall of Fame.
Early push because he started late. He turned professional at 26, 27 years of age. So with that said, just think about this. Lomachenko turned professional at 27. Okay, Jake Paul is 25 and he's fighting your local cab drivers, right? He's fighting your entertainers, your superstars from other disciplines, and that's where he gets the pushback, right? But Jake Paul, according to Boxing Forbes list, has surpassed Canelo Alvarez as the highest grossing boxer in the sport of boxing in 2020. By far, Canelo Alvarez in...
Let me say this. If that Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight does happen, and I actually do hope that it happens, that's going to do so many pay-per-view buys. I have no doubt about it whatsoever. I would not even be surprised if that fight did 2 million pay-per-view buys. And the reason why that is because even though Mike Tyson is 55 years old, there's going to be a lot of people that believe that Mike Tyson has a legitimate chance in this fight. I believe he has a legitimate chance in this fight. And yes, he may be 55 years old, but the type of power that Mike Tyson just was born with, that just doesn't go away. It just is what it is. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that he has the same punch that he had overall back all the way in 1986. But when it comes down to it, what I am saying is that some of that legitimate monstrous power is still there. You can tell that when he spars with coaches. You can tell that when he's still in that gym that, the skill set is still there. The muscle memory is still there. He's still somewhat fast. He's still somewhat strong. Sometimes when it comes to boxers, they don't lose it, or I'm not going to say that they don't lose it, but, they could still get in the ring with certain people and still whoop someone's ass. So that's why it's going to be very particularly interesting because Mike Tyson, this is going to be looked at as at least a 50-50 fight. In fact, a lot more people may actually favor Mike Tyson to beat Jake Paul. The only question I have is that where is Mike Tyson's conditioning at?
2021, excuse me, I said 2020. In 2021, Canelo Alvarez reportedly made $34 million. Okay. In 2021, Jake Paul reportedly made $45 million. So he made $11 million more than Canelo Alvarez inside the squared circle, inside Canelo Alvarez's respective sport. So his popularity is soaring. And because of that, Jake Paul is now in deep negotiations to face off against another legend, retired Hall of Fame iconic superstar boxer in Iron Mike Tyson, who is retired, finished his career 50 wins, 6 losses, no draws, 44 wins by way of knockout. 5 times in his career he was knocked out. Mike Tyson.
If Jake Paul is actually able to win that fight against Mike Tyson, in my opinion, and Jake Paul has said a multitude of times, he wants that Canelo Alvarez fight. Once again, like I said, these channels that I review sometimes, like Dante's Boxing Nation and these other channels, they always try to spread this bullshit about, Canelo, he's the fake number 1 pound for pound. Everyone overall from every other sport or every entertainer, when they want to face a boxer, they don't say, I want to face Vasily Lomachenko or I want to face Terrence Bud Crawford. Now, Lomachenko, Gervonta Tank Davis, those fighters, they're a little bit too small. So even then, I may I may not bring those up. They don't even mention Tyson Fury usually. The fighter that they mention is Saul Canelo Alvarez. Why is that? Because Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, he's the main face of boxing. He's the cash cow. He is the Floyd Mayweather Jr. overall of this era. Now, does that mean necessarily saying that he gets the same exact amount of numbers that Canelo Alvarez, that Mayweather got? No, that's not me saying that. But what I am saying is that he is a clear face of boxing. He is the main golden goose. It just is what it is.
Now 50.
But Mike Tyson is still a living legend in many people's eyes. He's still an icon. Like Mike Tyson, he's basically like on that level of like what Magic Johnson is overall for NBA basketball. Maybe he's not on the same level quite as like Muhammad Ali, and maybe he's even a little bit above Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao at this point in time, but you can actually argue that Mike Tyson, just in terms of his popularity, that he's even above them. I mean, Mike Tyson. Everyone on the planet pretty much knows who Mike Tyson is. So if Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson happens, I would not even be surprised if that did about 2 million pay-per-view buys, because there's just going to be so many people that say, "Wow, can Jake Paul really pull this off?" Or I would love to see Mike Tyson beat up Jake Paul when it comes down. It there's going to be so many people that are in tune to that fight.
5 years of age.
And if that happens, Canelo Alvarez, I don't think he'll have a problem actually with facing Jake Paul later on down the line, because he knows that would do big moolah.
5'10" with a 71-inch arm reach. Now Mike Tyson will be, by the time this fight comes to fruition, he'll be 56 years of age because his birthday is in June, and it looks like this could happen around that May time. So he'll be teetering on 56 years of age. Now Mike Tyson, he did an exhibition bout with another legend in Roy Jones Jr. That did massive pay-per-view numbers. And it.
Yes, and I believe that was an 8 round fight. And even though it looked like maybe they were going a bit easy on each other, what I'll say is this: Mike Tyson, I thought that he won that exhibition fight, and that was an 8 round fight. So let me say this: Mike Tyson, even though he probably does not have the same amount of physicality and conditioning that he did, of course, 20 years ago, or 25, 30 years ago, however long, it's been when it comes down to. But like I said, Mike Tyson, his conditioning actually doesn't seem bad. He seems like he's gotten himself somewhat in shape, and this would be a great fight for both of them, in my opinion.
It was a comeback legends fight. So Mike Tyson is now in negotiations with Jake Paul, which is going to do enormous numbers. They're expecting it to do $36 million live gate and pay-per-view.
The Mayweather versus Conor McGregor fight, that did, I don't even remember how many buys that did, but I think it actually did 2 million on pay-per-view buys. Jake Paul, he may even be able to do 2 million on pay-per-view buys. Now I wonder if Jake Paul, all in all, if he gets, let's say this gets 4 million, 2 million pay-per-view buys. Now that would be an insane amount. That's that's a little bit overall me hyping it up myself. But I wonder if these same guys, all in all, will say, "Wow, Jake Paul has even surpassed Mayweather as the biggest attraction in the sport." I bet they won't say that. Like I said, so is there a little bit overall of them maybe trying to tear down Canelo Alvarez? There could be a little bit of that, yes.
Numbers, okay? So Jake Paul has also started his own promotional company, and he signs the likes of female legend icon and future Hall of Famer and Amanda Serrano, who's a 7-division world champion, unified world champion, and going into the big.
That girl Amanda Serrano can fight. That Puerto Rican girl or whatever. And I don't usually say that about women boxers. It's no offense when it comes down to it, but there's just certain sports, all in all, in my opinion, that when it comes to the women's league, they're just not on the same level as the men. It just is what it is. Watching women's boxing the majority of the time, it's like watching the WNBA versus the NBA. You take a look at it, and it's like, yeah, some of the women are skilled, but the majority of the time, it's just an eyesore. It just is what it is. Besides, Claressa Shields, Katie Taylor, and Amanda Serrano, watching the rest of them, really, it just isn't that entertaining. But Amanda Serrano, I think what she's doing actually is very decently intelligent, and that's why she's been getting decently paid, because she's been on the undercards overall of a very, very big attraction. And then, of course, you had that girl, Claressa Shields, who, to be quite honest with you, probably needs a slap in the face of reality when it comes down to it with her toxic femininity. But it is what it is. But anyways, when it comes down to it, like I said, Claressa Shields, for example, she said overall, "Oh, well, don't ever disrespect me. I'll never be on a Jake Paul undercard because I'm, worth so much more than that, blah, 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 blah." Claressa, if you were really so much more worth than that, you wouldn't be trying to go into MMA to make more money, because no one goes into MMA to really make more money. What does that mean? Because boxing is, of course, a sport that has all the money. What does that mean? Claressa Shields, she ain't making shit over there. At least not a whole lot, because even Claressa Shields, for how very talented of a, woman boxer she is, who the hell is really watching her fights on average? Because no offense, but who the hell are you really facing? It's no offense against Claressa Shields. She's beaten everyone in front of her, but can you really remember one name on her, resume? I mean, I remember that one, German girl, straightforward overall, as a 2x4, board when it comes down to it. It's usually how German fighters fight. Christina Hammer, I remember her. But besides that, who else do we really remember? I mean, it just is what it is. Claressa Shields is basically like the weaker version of Ronda Rousey. And the reason why she was so hyped up, of course, a certain amount of people that say, "Oh, well, she got so hyped up because she was a Caucasian." Well, that might have been a part of it, but the main reason why Ronda Rousey was so popular is because she was doing things that were never seen before in the octagon. Seeing Ronda Rousey was basically like seeing Mike Tyson in the 80s. It was just something all in all that you just had to see. Because Mike Tyson, he would knock out people sometimes within like 21 seconds. He would knock out world champions. Sometimes, like I don't think super duper, great champions, but he would knock out certain people that had the belt within like 1 or 2 rounds. Ronda Rousey sometimes would literally submit people within about like 16 seconds. It was something all in all that was never seen before. But when you take a look at Claressa Shields, yeah, she's highly skilled overall for a woman boxer, but what is she really doing overall that's never been seen before? So when it comes down to it, if you're going to uplift a league like that, you have to have a product that people overall are going to be mainly attracted to. And usually people are just not going to be attracted to women's boxing. Because most of the time when people take a look at it, it's just not that entertaining. But Amanda Serrano, let me say this, she is one of the few female fighters that are in boxing that I actually really, really enjoy to watch. Now, there are certain female sports out there that are very enjoyable to watch. Maybe like women's soccer, even though I don't personally watch it a lot, but women's tennis is one of the sports that I'll watch, and women's MMA. Because those are actually very competitive sports. Those are sports actually that the women overall, they deserve a hell of a amount of respect in, because you can tell that in both of those leagues, they're very much, skilled. Whether it be Serena Williams or Naomi Osaka or who the hell is that? Maria Sharapova. Once upon a time, Steffi Graf. You can tell that they're all very skilled for their sport. In terms of MMA, you have Rose Namajunas, Amanda Nunes, you have Valentina Shevchenko, and a few others that I maybe, am not thinking of. So you can tell that those women that, not only do they bring the entertainment, but they're actually highly skilled for their sport.
His fight of her career against undisputed multi-division world champion.
So like I said, Claressa Shields, she can say all this bullshit about, oh, well, don't ever disrespect me. I'll never be on a Jake Paul undercard. No offense, Claressa, but you're not worth more than Jake Paul. It just is what it is. Now, certain people may say, all in all, well, neither is Canelo Alvarez. When it comes down to it, so overall, why don't you bring that up? Well, the difference is that Canelo Alvarez, he's in the professional sport of boxing. Jake Paul is going to get more even than that of a Canelo Alvarez at certain times, because not only all in all, does he have, an undefeated record in boxing against these guys, but he's also a little bit of a novelty act. He's a person overall that is mainly an entertainer. He's not just mainly a professional boxer. He's someone overall that was coming in with a reputation from day one. The problem is overall with women's boxing is that, just compared to their contemporaries, compared to the male boxers, they usually cannot even compete. Even Katie Taylor or Amanda Serrano or Claressa Shields, even if you were to have all those fighters on a pay-per-view, if it was just plainly a women's card, how many buys do you think it would do? Probably not that many.
United Kingdom superstar Katie Taylor at Madison Square Garden. It looks like that's going to take place in sometime in April, May. Okay, so with that said, Jake Paul signed.
If Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano happened on the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson undercard, that would be probably one of the most sought after pay-per-views of all time. Let me tell you what, there's not a lot of big fights in women's boxing, but if Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano happened, I mean, shit, that'd be like Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield. I would have to look at their styles a little bit more, but what I will say is this, that'd be a terrific fight. If you're asking me personally, actually, who I would bet on to win that fight, just off of what I've seen from both of them, probably Amanda Serrano. They both have some faults, but Amanda Serrano, she has very great power overall, for her sport, and she can really box. But Katie Taylor can as well, though, so I would have to take a look at that. But I think that from what I've seen, I've just seen a little bit more faulty in her style. But I would have to watch.
Amanda Serrano, and guess what? Jake Paul's going to do something and break history again. He's going to break ground again, as Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor are both set to make over $1 million for the first time in women's boxing history. Have we ever had a female make over $1 million in a fight? And now you're going to have two females making over $1 million.
That's a great thing. I hope eventually that women's boxing, I hope that eventually it becomes entertaining, just like tennis for women's and just like soccer and just like MMA. Do I think it'll ever get to that level? I don't know if it will, but I hope it does, for their sake. But the competition is just going to have to be better. Because half of the time when you see overall, even one of the more talented women boxers, they're usually going in there against a complete, tomato sack. It just is what it is, or potato sack, someone that just usually can't box at all.
I was in one fight in one night at the most famous arena in the world, Madison Square Garden, New York. So history will be made again on the part of Jake Paul. So now Canelo Alvarez is viewed as the face of the sport of boxing. Canelo Alvarez is viewed as the pay-per-view king, the cash cow in the sport of boxing. And here we have a YouTuber and taking the format and taking it to a whole nother level and outgrossing and out-earning the face of the sport of boxing, or who's being considered the face of the sport of boxing, in Canelo Alvarez. And Jake Paul is a YouTuber, okay?
Well, I don't know if he's actually averaging more views, at least than what a Canelo Alvarez did. I don't know if Jake Paul, maybe he has. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what his highest grossing numbers are, but I do know that Canelo Alvarez, I know that his highest pay-per-view, I know all in all that it was about 1.1 million buys or maybe even more. Now, of course, the one with Floyd Mayweather Jr., that one did even more, but I'm talking about the fights that he won.
Now he's going to smash records and do even bigger numbers facing off against Mike Tyson. Now, Jake Paul, who's not a small guy, Jake Paul is looking to face off against other boxing novices to prove his point, to solidify himself as a true boxer. Okay, so he was supposed to face off against two-time undefeated heavyweight world champion superstar United Kingdom boxer Tyson Gypsy King Fury's brother in Tommy Fury. Tommy Fury is a novice in the sport of boxing. He don't look so great.
I don't know if I would say that he's a novice. He clearly has more training than what a Jake Paul has. So Tommy Fury, when it comes down to it, this is why I predicted if that fight actually were to happen, I would have predicted more than likely that Tommy Fury would have beat Jake Paul. But you never know.
Okay, so the problem here is that Jake Paul doesn't get the recognition, the acknowledgement, because simply Jake Paul is a novice in the sport of boxing. He's just coming into the sport of boxing, and because he's a
Well, he gets somewhat of the recognition, but I do have to wonder, Mr. Blue Blood, are you giving him so much recognition also because maybe there's a secret agenda here, maybe to tear down Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez's numbers? I do have to wonder that maybe if this was a Floyd Mayweather Jr. or a Gervonta Tank Davis or an Errol Spence Jr., if they were doing very high numbers, would you be talking about him the same way? Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he would be. I don't know.
mouthpiece. He promotes himself. He's already rich, coming from a different lane, okay, line of business. He's already rich because he's a YouTuber. He takes the sport of boxing serious. But because he's fighting entertainers, people are not taking him serious and writing him off as.
Well, Jake Paul gets a certain amount of credit, but he can only get so much credit when he's facing people that have really never even boxed before. I mean, the biggest wins of his career are against who? Nate Robinson, Tyron Woodley, and Ben Askren. So it just is what it is. I mean, he gets the recognition, in my opinion, that he deserves, but it'll show overall with his pay-per-views. But I don't think that there's any problem with what Jake Paul's doing. I don't really have a problem with it. You know, good way to make money, and in my personal opinion, is great entertainment.
Well, Jake Paul is doing exhibitions. No, he's not doing exhibitions. It's a legit boxing matches. Okay, you have boxers that don't fight. They fight 4 rounds for the first 10 fights against guys you never heard of, 9-to-5ers. Okay, you don't know what they do in their background. Canelo Alvarez. Let's just go look at this. His first fight was against Abraham Gonzalez. Okay, as a professional, he got a TKO victory. Abraham Gonzalez had 1 fight in his career. He never fought again. That fight was against Canelo Alvarez. He ended his career 0-1-0. Okay.
I get your point, Blue, and I overall understand what you're saying, but like I said, we have to take a look at this with a different context. Because Jake Paul, when it comes down to it, like I said, he's not facing legitimate boxers. And, you know, I know certain people, even Jake Paul, he's gone as far, and I think he's playing the heel pretty well, so I think he knows what he's doing. But Jake Paul does take boxing very seriously. He is very confident in himself, and I don't have a problem with that. But to go as far to say all in all that, you know, you're the biggest attraction in the sport when it comes down to it, or, you know, you're the main cash cow in all of boxing, I can't say that until you face actually a legitimately ranked boxer. You know, this next fight against Mike Tyson, I think all in all that it's actually a great fight. But like I said, if Jake Paul is going to be called the legitimate, biggest attraction in all of boxing when it comes down to it, I need to see you actually face a ranked boxer.
Then Canelo Alvarez, he faced off against Pablo Alvarado, who had 1 fight in his career. That was against Canelo Alvarez. He ended his career 0-1-0. Then Canelo Alvarez, he fought Miguel Vasquez, okay, who debuted against Canelo Alvarez, and again, he never fought ever again. His only fight is against Canelo Alvarez. Then he faced off against Pedro Lopez, who was 0-1. Uh, and he had one fight which he lost to Canelo Alvarez, and he never fought again. Then he fought against Jorge Juarez, who was total of 8 fights, 3 wins, 5 losses, and Canelo Alvarez got a draw with this guy. Then he fought Juan Hernandez, who had a total of 4 fights in his career, and he lost to Canelo Alvarez. Then he fought Christian Hernandez, okay, who had no fights. And he fought one time in his career. Now he finished his career.
You know, one time overall, I heard the channel Dante's Boxing Nation. He made the legitimate point of trying to tear down Canelo Alvarez because he said that he got a draw early on in his career, and all in all, it was against the bum. Like, dude, Canelo Alvarez was like 4 fights in. Like, who actually would make a dumbass point like that? That's why it's so hard for me to respect really what a lot of these guys say, because most people who talk boxing, they don't know shit about boxing. It just is what it is. That's why they get so many fight predictions wrong. Like Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV and some of these other channels that I see out here. Like, I just take a look at them and I'm like, do you really have a brain? Like, what the hell do you have rattling up in in that skull of yours? Like, what is up there?
0-1-0, and that's against Canelo Alvarez. Then Canelo Alvarez fought Francisco Villanueva. 4 wins, 5 losses, no draws. Canelo Alvarez knocked him out. Then, once again, he fights another guy who never had a fight in his career as a professional, Daniel Martinez, and he lost 0-1-0 to Canelo Alvarez. And he gets.
But like I said, with this Jake Paul situation, we can sit here and allege if we want to say that he's the biggest star over Canelo Alvarez. Well, if you're also going to allege that, then allege the same thing with Floyd Mayweather Jr., Mike Tyson, and Manny Pacquiao. If you're going to allege that, then what you also have to say is, wow, Jake Paul might be the biggest attraction in boxing history. Because what fighter overall within their first 5 fights, when it comes down to it, has done the numbers that he's done? It's amazing. That's why I said I think that there's a little bit of a secret narrative going on here to possibly tear down Canelo Alvarez. Because let's be real, we have to put this in context. It just is what it is. We all know why Jake Paul, all in all, is getting the amount of numbers that he is getting. And it's great that he's getting those numbers. It's a great thing. I don't have a problem with it. But if you're going to go as far to say, "Oh, I'm the biggest attraction in the sport," I mean, to a degree, I get it. But at the same time, like I said, we have to understand that he's not facing legitimate boxers.
What? He never fought again. So then he fought Javier Martinez, who was debuting again, another fighter with no fights. And he has 1 fight in his career. He loses to Canelo Alvarez, and he never fights again. So then he fights Ivan Aleskis. 4 wins, 5 losses. Canelo knocks him out. He never fights again. So you get the picture, right? Canelo Alvarez fought at least leading up into his step-ups. He has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 fights. His first 10 fights, he fought 7 guys that never had a professional boxing match in their life. And they only had 1 fight, and that fight was against Canelo Alvarez. So this happens as a novice in the sport of boxing, okay? It just is what it is. This is how things play out when you first starting off as a professional boxer. The problem is Jake Paul is doing it against guys like Nate Robinson. Nate Robinson is a name, okay? And he comes from a different respect.
Well, of course, that's why he's getting so many numbers, and Jake Paul is going to have to do that. He's going to have to face off against other celebrities. Maybe you could have got away with facing some bums, but the point is this: whoever you're facing with next, the next fight is going to have to be a step up, and the next fight is going to have to be a step up, and the next fight is going to have to be a step up. It doesn't have to be a major step up. Jake Paul doesn't have to go in the ring there with Artur Bitterbeef, but when it comes down to it, each and every fight is going to have to be a step up or looked at as legitimately competitive. That's why the last numbers with Tyron Woodley in the rematch, they didn't do so well, because so many people thought that it was going to be the same result.
Discipline, but those guys Canelo Alvarez fought, who knows what line of profession they was in before they stepped in the ring with Canelo Alvarez. You just don't know. Okay.
Well, I have a feeling all in all that they were in professional boxing, Blue. Come on. you more than likely know that just like I do. You think all in all that every single one of those 10 guys, that all in all that, they just weren't training for professional boxing? Like, come on, man. I mean, don't get me wrong. Maybe you could be correct. There are certain people that, they just jump into it and all in all, like I said, but I have a feeling more than likely that they were somewhat trained, probably at least for a couple years. Now, there are some people that, they used to be just cab drivers, or they used to overall, just do simple things for a living, and then they got involved in boxing and they really loved it, and they were really talented, with it, even with the first couple goes, and they started fighting professionally a little bit early. But, if I had to guess, more than likely, if you're trying to compare it and basically say that Canelo was not facing actual boxers. No, he was facing boxers within his first 10 fights. He just probably wasn't facing boxers on that high of a level. But that's what happens when you're new to new to the sport. Unless you're a Vasily Lomachenko or a Guillermo Rigondeaux, someone with a very extensive and expansive amateur background.
Okay? And then he fought Tyron Woodley, who's a combat athlete, but he never had a professional boxing match. Again, the same situation like Canelo Alvarez. I guarantee you put Tyron Woodley in one of those 7 guys that never had a fight in their life before facing Canelo Alvarez. I'm sure Tyron Woodley would get some victories over those guys. So the
Well, maybe. And what that tells me is that basically you're trying to kind of somewhat tear down Canelo Alvarez a little bit. Maybe not. I don't know. But I'm sensing it a little bit there. It just is what it is. I mean, but you would also have to allege that, it was on the same level, because Canelo, sure, he was trained probably for years when it came down to it. But fighting, in the amateurs or fighting overall in the Olympics is completely different than facing someone in the professionals. So even facing someone that may be 1-0, or that doesn't have any fights in the record in a professional boxing match, it's different. It just is what it is, especially if you're facing guys that have been legitimately trained for boxing. It just is what it is.
point is that Jake Paul is a novice and he's becoming the cash cow and a major player in the sport of boxing, starting his own promotional company.
He's becoming a very big attraction. But like I said, we do have to keep this in context, because Jake Paul, like I said, he has not fought a legitimate professional boxer.
And
Once again, that doesn't mean that, what I think Jake Paul is doing is not a great thing. I think that it is a great thing. But before we call him the biggest attraction in all the sport, let's slow the roll a little bit. It just is what it is.
big money.
I mean, it'd be like basically if Usain Bolt, if he joined the NFL. And at one point in time, a lot of people may not remember, there was talks about that. There's also been talks at one point in time that LeBron James, could join the NFL. Shit, knowing how big Serena Williams is and some of the rumors I've heard about her, she could probably join the NFL with her with her man-like ass. But it just is what it is. If any one of those athletes, were to play in the NFL, even one game, they would probably get way more viewership, overall than the average NFL game. Does that mean all in all that we just say, oh, well, we clearly know that they're the biggest attraction in all the NFL? Of course, because everyone wants to see overall how they're going to do.
Fighters' career changing paydays for these fighters on his undercard. And, he's getting highlight reel knockouts. And now he's reportedly earned more money in the sport of boxing than Canelo Alvarez, according to Forbes. And now he's going to go into a major showdown with Mike Tyson that's only going to heighten his profile, his name, and his platform. So let's see how.
I agree, and I think that that's a great thing. I just think that we need to slow the roll a little bit on calling him the biggest attraction in all the boxing once again, when he has not fought any legitimate fighters. But there's no doubt about it. He is a big attraction. But, we'll see what happens. But that fight will be very, very interesting. Like I said, I'm going to be very interested to see if Mike Tyson really has the same conditioning anywhere near overall to be competitive for an 8-round fight. And it looked like he had it in his last fight against Roy Jones Jr. It's going to be interesting.
This unfolds and plays out. But that's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button, drop a comment in the comment section, let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notification. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like your shitty videos. That's all I got for you. Peace.
That's pretty much about it for me as well. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.
Make sure you check out